Hello, everyone. Welcome to this latest recording of A Conversation With. Today, David Gray is rejoining us. How are you doing, David?
John, it's a pleasure to be back. Glad to have you.
Great. Thank you so much. And for the audience, in the past, David and I spoke about his time with the Freemasons and coming out of that and his conversion. And then we did a separate show on the beginning of Advent and liturgical customs and so forth. And today we're going to be talking about, shall we say, a critique of the critique, and we'll explain our parameters as we're going forward. Before we get into this topic, just one announcement concerning Apocastasis Institute, and that is appropriate to our spiritual discussion coming up. An invitation to one and all to join us online for the Divine Office during the school week. You can join the staff and the students. We have various of the hours that we offer, prime and terce and sext and compline and all this good stuff. And you can find out all about that on our website under the Liturgy and Pilgrimage tab. And that'll be down below in the description. Also down below is David's site, and you can see that in the little white bubble on our guest's screen. You can see that stdominicsmedia.com. That website will also be in the description there. So, announcing you, David, what have you been up to lately?
Got a lot of projects, John, at St. Dominic's Media, trying to start the year off with. We have a very interesting memoir that's being published by a traditional landmass priest out of Australia. I think he's retired now, so it's going to be very interesting. He has some interesting critiques about what's been happening in his whole priesthood spanning over 60 years. So that's going to be an interesting book, and some other books that we plan to release later this year, and finishing up my series on the Catechism, and so a lot of projects at St. Dominic's Media. Other than that, just living in Germany, family's fine, and just waiting for better weather to show up here. So yeah, life's good.
Just by the by that I have your ear, in Germany last year, there was all sorts of flurries and all sorts of anxiety over the gas prices and the gas access in Germany. How is the situation this year? I know that the idea last year was that, what's this winter was going to be really catastrophic for the German energy and all this stuff. Is that a problem at all, or has that all been straightened out?
It doesn't seem to be the case. Prices for fuel, prices for oil, it's about the same as last year's. It's still rather high, even for Americans who get their fuel on base. We get a discount. It's still really high per liter, but it seems in Germany they seem to be more concerned with some other issues these last few months. The farmers have been striking.
Yes.
During COVID, the COVID reaction, there were a lot of benefits given to them, a lot of subsidies, a lot of tax breaks for them in a lot of industries. So now, since things are, getting back to normal, as they say, the government of Germany wants to take back those subsidies and raise the taxes. So taxes are going back up, and the farmers are not happy. So they've shut down a lot of the A6 a few times. They shut down the whole downtown in Berlin and Munich. So it's been a lot of strikes with a lot of different industries. So that's kind of what's occupying the minds of the Germans right now.
Okay, interesting. And as we proceed into this topic for the audience, I want to highlight that point that David is living in Europe, and he's going to give us an insight coming from America and to Europe. You can make a certain contrast and comparisons, especially as we speak about the Catholic population in both countries, and we can approach that. But David, as we set out, is that a good working title as we're doing so? The critique of the critique, and maybe we can flesh out what our main topic is. How would you phrase our our time together here? What are we doing?
Yeah, so there appears to be, I would say, camps, or there's different ways to speak about, I think, what's going on in Catholicism, especially I would say in North America, perhaps other parts as well, but particularly North America, that we're seeing that uh, we could use the word denominations, which is a strange word to apply to Catholicism because we all confess one creed. So, how can we speak of denominations within Catholicism and how this is affecting the church? Well, we could say, well, if we do confess one creed, yet we do see division in the church, we see tribes, we see camps. How can we speak of the nominalization of the church as well? Well, we can say, well, perhaps on a level of culture, perhaps on a level of ethos, that we do see that Catholicism in North America seems to be splitting, perhaps in light of the new document coming out of the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, concerning gay blessings, blessings of so-called irregular marriages. Globally, we see a lot of um, we see a completely new thing. We see there have been periods of time in Catholicism where you would never see such a public response to a pope from bishops. So there's ways that we could probably speak of this, is what's going on with the bishops, what's going on with the laity globally in the United States. We could also probably speak of what we see with social media commentators, whether they be laity, whether they be clerics. And what does that say? What does that portend about the future of the church? So it's probably a big topic that we can probably whittle down and find different ways to really address what's going on, and whether it's healthy, whether it's harmful.
Great, thank you for that. That's very helpful, David. And as we sketch things out, what I want to also highlight is the larger stress of modernity that we see on, I think, many groups of faithful, uh, and in fact, even in many religions throughout the world. I mean, this whole concept of modernity and how that is stressing things, certainly amongst Catholics as well. And then here in these United States, we have a question that we can think about as we go along, and that is, historically, well, America is not that old of a country, and it's certainly not that old of a culture, and we might want to meditate on really how deep are the roots of Catholicism in America and how that might explain the fragmentation that we're seeing in things. And you have quite an insight on this, because you've looked into Black Catholic Americans and
Yeah.
and so forth, and we've talked about that in the past. How would you describe, David? How would you describe the Catholic roots in America in terms of its longevity and in terms of perhaps certain distortions which have entered into American Catholicism long before Supplicans and the internet doctors and so forth?
Yeah, so United States Catholicism in the United States had a very interesting beginning. Obviously, a lot of anti-Catholicism in the upper Northeast, in the forming colonies. Many of the people who came over from Europe were anti-Catholics, and so there was a lot of hostility from the beginning. Um, Very early on, we've seen some bishops and many priests in the United States. There was a struggle with the institution of slavery. We've seen popes such as Gregory, and Gregory the Great. He issues a definitive document against slavery. And we see a number of bishops in the South in Catholicism push back against that document, reinterpret it, find a workaround so that Catholics can still participate in the slave trade in the South. So from the very beginning, and then we also begin perhaps talk about the Jesuits in the United States, even while their period of being suppressed, and the work they did forming universities and the university system. and their how they partook in slavery and sold slaves and things like this. So from the very beginning, we see with the bishops in the United States um, that the idea of being obedient to the Pope at all times and the teachings of the Church, there appears at times where there was a rub, and this is nothing new to the United States. We see that with Austria, I think, in the mid 1700s, concerning documents against Freemasonry. There's places like Austria and some other places that said, I think we'll pass on that teaching. So I don't think it's nothing new to the United States or to the bishops here, but it does say something about the culture that early culture, the formation of a culture of American Catholicism in this relationship with the Vatican. We talked about, I think, another time in early 1900s when the Vatican was very interested in doing something about Black Catholics in the United States, or even Black Americans in the United States. Like, what can we do to bring them into the Catholic Church? And the response from the bishops at that time, and this was still in mission territory, but their response was, let's form a committee to take a look at this. No really definitive action. So we see, like, in the United States, a really close relationship between political interests and the interests of what the bishops in the United States, how they wanted to move. So, and I think that political interest of the dominating parties and the Catholic churches, the bishops of the United States, I don't really think we can really separate them so much. And I think that plays well into a lot of things that's going on. Just real quick, we could even look at where the church has developed her teaching on human life, and saying that all human beings made in the image and likeness of God has this immutable sacredness and dignity. And so it's gotten to the point now, I think in 2017, Pope Francis will say, well, the death penalty is inadmissible. Well, in the United States, it's, when it comes to Catholics, we find that the Catholics who disagree with that are Catholics who have a particular political allegiance as well. And that political allegiance would also say, oh, no, the death penalty is fine. Whereas, and we've seen this same thing with another group in the United States, we would call them maybe liberal Catholics. When the church makes definitive statements about human life concerning life in the womb, those Catholics have a political leaning that says, no, killing babies in the womb is fine. So in the United States, life seems to be a political issue rather than a moral issue. And that's different than what the Catholic Church is saying, that it is a moral issue, whether it's any stage of development. So these are just a few examples I will point to say that Catholicism in the United States seems to be deeply affected by the individual's political beliefs, sometimes even more so than the teachings of the church.
Yeah, and historically, I would add a few more points, and we can reprise these when we consider the anti-intellectualism on some of these internet scholars, and certain other trends. So, for instance, I would, in addition to just to build up some of the things you pointed out, I would suggest that English-speaking Catholicism in Britain and Ireland, but also in these United States, is inherently insecure coming out of the Reformation times. And so I think, and with the nativism that you talked about in American history too, there's a psychological insecurity in American Catholics to want to belong to the larger society. So there's that. I also bring up, because of the Reformation, a lot of English-speaking clerics, especially Irish, ended up going to parts of France in the 1800s and earlier that were Jansenist. And so a lot of the Jansenist kind of Calvinist and rigorist and, shall we say, anti-intellectual or Fidist, F-I-D-I-S-T, tendencies also came over to America. So we have to understand, even before, some of the hanky-panky in the 20th century, liturgically or whatnot, that American Catholicism had these fissures in it way back when. And just again, also to say nothing of the shortness of time that we're dealing with in American culture. And then finally, I also think back to the stresses especially in the 19th century, over church ownership here in America between the bishops and the boards of the churches, because a lot of Catholics, they kind of liked here in New England, the Congregationalist model, where you would have a board of directors owning the property, and there was a real tug of war between the bishops and the clergy. I think a lot of that was accentuated by the Protestant governing structure with church boards and so forth.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought out the desire of some Catholics to really belong to the mainstream society in the United States. I think one of the definitive documents that was produced was a Land O'Lakes statement in 1967. I think it was in Wisconsin. You had professors there from Notre Dame and other Catholic universities. I think Father Theodore Hesburgh, his name pops up a lot concerning this. But so in that document was an expression by the Catholic universities, Georgetown, Notre Dame, and the big players, saying that to really succeed as academic universities, we need some autonomy. And this is really their push to somehow catch up to Harvard and Yale and some of these more, mainstream universities. And that really, I think, was a breach that this idea that let's be autonomous from the church and pursue our own path, I think that document has shaped Catholic higher education definitively for a long time.
Yeah, I'm always struck, especially here in New England, over these Catholic boarding schools, which were, designed at a certain time in our history to compete with the WASP boarding schools. And 1 mile through these forests is, Canterbury School. It's, a nice, kind of waspy name. Canterbury School is a Catholic school. It's all the big shots. Paris Hilton was up there, and JFK, and all these sorts. But if you look at the colleges, Georgetown, these are just like waspy names for these Catholic colleges. And I think that even the names of the Catholic schools are signs of the insecurity. It's not, St. Joe's, University or St. Joe's High School. It's Canterbury, it's Georgetown, it's Fordham. So there's that idea to fit in, even in the institutional naming.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Something that strikes me as we look at the scene of Catholicism, or dare we say Catholicisms, in our time, is this idea which seems to have arisen, maybe with certain sympathies. I obviously, with my background, certain times I was very sympathetic to certain of these traditional groups and so forth. But something seemed to have arisen in the second half of the 20th century in particular, where there's this idea that there's this Catholic tradition, or there's this Catholicism that can be accessed outside of the Magisterium right now.
Yeah.
And it strikes me, and I'm very familiar with these dear communities of people, if something comes out of Rome and it contradicts what I understand Catholicism to be in, my Baltimore Catechism, therefore I can ignore it.
Yeah.
And it strikes me, before I kick it back to you, David, it strikes me that this is exactly the error that the Orthodox made in their time, and the Protestants made in their time, to say that there is some time in the past that there was a Christianity that can be accessed and revivified. So for the Orthodox, that's the first millennium. Everything now from Rome can be ignored because of the first millennium. And the same with the Protestants in the first century or the second century. Yeah. And there's this time period that can be recreated. And that seems to be where a lot of Catholic thinkers are drifting towards.
Yeah. And on one level, I think you can sympathize with it, right? Especially, you spoke of modernity. And I think with the advent of Pope Francis, I think in 2011, he becomes Pope. Or was it 12 or 13? I can't recall now. Perhaps 13.
Mm.
You can sympathize with it because, and even the broader culture, the consequences of the sexual revolution. All revolutions historically have been anti-Catholic. And I think the sexual revolution and its fruits as byproducts have been very anti-Catholic globally. And so, how do you respond to that? What do you do? How do you recover this loss of the sense of the sacred? And I think there has been a loss of the sense of the sacred, and things have been lost along the way. And people do want to recover these things. And so I think there is a tribe within Catholicism that would like to say, okay, the best thing that we can do, the way that we can recover that which has been lost, is just to get in our time machine, put some diesel gas in it, see how far we can go back, and let's recover that. Let's go back and grab everything that made us who we were. Right? There's some critiques of that because you say, okay, well, let's focus on tradition. Well, the immediate critique is, well, what traditions? Not all traditions are sacred. Not all traditions are worthy to bring forward into the future. So I do sympathize with the effort. I do sympathize with the motives because something is a foul, and I sense with some of the things that this papacy has been involved with,
Mm.
whether it's actual, whether there's perception, that yes, I get that. But at the same time, I agree with you that it does smell Protestant. It even at times smells Gnostic, as
Mm.
if people say, well, those who say, well, you gotta come to a traditional Latin Mass, you have to forsake the Novus Ordo, and because the traditional Latin Mass, this is all you need. This is over here is the truth, right?
Mm.
It smells a little Gnostic, and then the bigger problem with that, right, is that, well, what's the limits of this idea? What's the limits of saying, well, it's the traditions that will be our safe space? Well, one problem that you've seen emerge from that was this movement of saying, let's recognize and resist.
Mm.
So the traditionalists, as I'll call them, they would say, well, we need to recognize and resist what Pope Francis is doing. And so this is what I'm talking about. Well, how far do we go? What's the red line? What line won't we cross if we're recognizing and resisting? How far does the resistance go? No one has spelled that out. And there's been, with a lot of these Catholic social media commentators, many of them, not deeper than a puddle of spit in a Sahara desert on that's evaporating. But um, what's the limits? How far do we go? Someone needs to explain. Otherwise, this movement continues to really mimic what they will critique, which is modernism. You'll have the so-called liberal Catholics who would say, we're saying the same thing about Pope Benedict XVI. We have to recognize and resist. He's too
Mm.
traditional. We're going to reject this. We're going to reject that. This a la carte, this picking and choosing.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened on both sides. So the traditionalists are looking a lot like those who they would be against, and I don't think they notice that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, and I want to second your sympathy, and because I feel that too, because you look at one's generic church, and perhaps we can compare in Germany, but certainly in America, your generic suburban church is aesthetically not the liturgy is not really in harmony with Catholic music or Catholic art, and it is very frustrating. It's very frustrating once if you know the Catholic liturgical history and the spirituality. But often there's a hard reaction against that, and I'm also cognizant of the criminality and the clerical structure in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and things like McCarrick. And McCarrick was basically doing in America what Jeffrey Epstein was doing with civil leaders in terms of compromising clerics and things. So there's a frustration to want to act against it, but often there is such an overreaction to authorities that you no longer trust, maybe for good reason, with some of the hanky-panky from some of the bishops historically in this country. But then you go, so what becomes your magisterium then? It becomes the dude who's putting out his newsletter. It's the dude who's on a podcast. And it's your local, conspiracy guy or conservative commentator, as someone who listens to a huge amount of that sort of thing. But that's not the magisterium. And a lot of people are getting their worldview not from the catechism, from your classes, or from their local bishop, but they're getting it from Joe Blow on BitChute or something.
That was a colorful commentary. I like that, especially the McCarrick Epstein comparison. I've never heard that, John. That's quite amazing. But yeah, the pendulum does swing, and it inevitably has to reach a climax, and we have to ask that at that point, like, is this thing going to swing back, and where is it going to settle? And I think that perhaps we're getting to that point now, that people who are, because of who made us in the image and likeness of God, he who is truth made us to pursue truth, made us to desire truth. We have this capacity by which we want to search for truth. And of course, we can speak about those who, pursue it in the wrong ways, whether it's drugs, whether it's, fornication, all these false goods. But I think a lot of Catholics are truly searching for the objective good. And they don't have any confidence or security in the fact that they're going to get it at the magisterium for some of the reasons that we already laid out. There seems to be uncertainty. There seems to be it doesn't seem to be very, it's not a lot of clarity. There seems to be political agendas at play when you have a pope seem very interested in things such as climate agenda and things like that. And so again, like we said before, we get it. We understand. So if I am in search of truth, and because of who created me and why he created me, where do I find that at? If I can't find it where historically the church has said is here, it's the magisterium, it's the teachings of the church. So I get it. Again, I get it. But I think there's just a lack of trust in Jesus Christ. Right? I think there's people who, in as much as they seek the truth and they desire the truth, that at the same time, simultaneously, they seem to rejecting he who is truth himself and his church. So I think we have to trust that Jesus Christ is, he loves his church, and he's never going to let anything harm us or lead us astray. So I feel really, I feel sad at times that we've gotten to this point where we believe that truth is not where Christ has promised that it would be and where it will remain, that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. Rather, it's on the podcast, it's on the BitChute, and these other places, like you said.
And part of this, too, in these United States, is as the world continues to go its way, and that instability and chicanery and all sorts of adjectives and such continues to develop, thanks be to God, a lot of people have come into the church have come in even to Christianity itself and come into the church. And what we're faced with, I think, too, David, is you have a rather large amount of new converts coming in. Thanks be to God. They see what's up and they've acted on it. That's good. That's good. But there's still a lot of baggage from that time in the world. And I've seen this with a number of people just in my own intercourse, is, they're getting all this information. They've had this religious conversion, and I've seen it within just 2 or 3 years. They go from being in the world to, coming into the church. And then, next thing you know, they're in some, Sedevacanist group, or they're in, some Feenite, faction. And what some part of that baggage is that that Protestant idea that the church institutional is a natural organization that can be discussed in the same manner you can speak of the Congress in Hartford or in Washington, or the European Union or whatever, your Reichstag or whatever the case may be in Germany, right? We've taken this Protestant idea that the church is just a natural institution and speak freely about it, and you can use political terms like left wing and right wing for the Pope and the bishops and everything. And that consciousness of what is the church as a social institution, as a supernatural institution, has not been renewed in Christ by many people in these United States.
Yeah. And one thing I think is different in that regard from what we see in Europe versus what we see in the United States.
Yes.
The space by which these social media commentators have to, one, exist, and two, to profit off of stirring division, right? So it's not really something, it seems to be the case in a lot of places outside the United States or North America that the people on these social media platforms, they tend to be clerics, they tend to be religious. You don't have just this, I think maybe in Ireland there may be a couple, but largely you don't see the lay commentator out here, or even many priests, right? But, and I don't mean to cast aspersions or raise suspicion or anything like that, but I just don't think we can, John. I don't think we can look past two things. One, the vast amounts of money that one can gain by taking particular positions against the magisterium, right? And the cult followings that they can create. We saw back in the late 80s and early 90s, we saw the Catholic apologetics movement, which is largely, something of the United States or North America. It's not really something that you see other places. Australia maybe have a taste of it, but as far as being an industry, the Patrick Madrid and Catholic Answers and things like that, this is a big business in the United States. And we saw that in the late 80s and 90s and going into the 2000s. This was a mega industry selling a lot of books, conferences, and it was a whole thing.
Cruises,
yeah. And so what we've seen after COVID and a little bit before COVID was something different. We've seen this transition to, with the onset of YouTube and other social media platforms, we've seen this transition to what you and I are on right now, onto the social media platform. And we saw a transfer of wealth, that it was no longer that people, there was a big audience and a growing audience today of people who are looking for this free content that they don't have to pay for, that doesn't have the rigor and the depth of what the apologetics movement was offering. At least they were offering books. They're offering
citations.
People with degrees, and they have some rigor and some thinking. But now it's really cheap. It's easy. It's accessible. What I call it is a type of pornography, even, that you can just put out this content and people will consume it and there won't be much critique of it at all. I have people sometimes comment on my channel or comment on my social media, my Facebook page, and then they'll repeat something that some guy said as if it were true, as if what they
Mm,
said was magisterial or something like that. This is the power of the social media commentator, and it's something that I know you and I we take great responsibility for. Um, on your old YouTube channel and on your new, and I do as well.
mm,
That we have to be very careful about what we put out there, because there are people who's going to take what we say for the gospel and they're going to run with it. It just
mhm,
happens to be the case that we have a problem with this. And again, I'm not saying that we need the bishops to come police us, um, but at the same time, there's no accountability, there's no controls, and there's nothing in place to um, to manage what is happening and what could happen and what we see happening with this disposition in this culture of that. As long as I have an audience, as long as I have a following, I'm free to say whatever I want to say about the church, the Pope, and it's fine as long as I have an audience, as long as I have a following, as long as I have somebody cheering me. And I really don't know where the limits of that, John.
mhm. Yeah, well, there's always there's always sub basements. I'll give you a few examples of some of the silliness that I've heard lately, and uh, this is really coming out of the American. Uh, so you mentioned the dynamics right now with the social media and the click money, because some of these people, if they're monetized, you got to get eyeballs on them, and the topics to speak about, to hit those buttons and get those eyeballs. But a part of it too is this anti-intellectualism, which comes out of the Reformation. And
Mm,
so the Reformation is this hard pull against the kind of the Greco drift of the Renaissance, which had its own errors. So the Reformation is hard pull into fideism, where everything is faith, and anything that is not explicitly Christian revelation is under the dominion of Satan, and reason is a whore, as Luther said. And so you have this in Protestant societies, you have this hostility that develops between secular knowledge and religious knowledge and revelation.
yeah.
And that certainly comes over here in our radical Reformation tradition, which at least continental Protestantism, like Lutheranism or Calvinism, at least it had some regard for the intellect and for some measure of church history and councils and things. But the American Protestantism is just Joe Blow with his Bible. It's that radical Reformation tradition.
That's a good point.
So you have that inherent suspicion of knowledge and learning just in just the general Protestantized American culture. And then you have the genuine dereliction, as I see it, of the academy in America,
Mm,
um, selling out to banks with the student loan crises, a tremendous betrayal of youth in this country with that, selling out to political ideologies for longer than that. And so, well, golly, that does what's the result of that? People don't trust the academy anymore.
mm,
And the academy brought that on itself in large regard. So you have the betrayal of the academy, which has accentuated anti-intellectualism here in America. And then I'm just going to give you three quick examples of that I've seen in this commentariat that's arisen by these laymen online, of just things that you wouldn't get through a high school class if you tried to pull this stuff off. But because you have a YouTube channel and nobody's going to check you on it, people get away with it. A few weeks ago, I heard one of these big shots, and you'd know the name. The people would know the name of whom I'm talking about. Say with a straight face, David. Say with a straight face, I don't think you should be able to speak about the Catholic faith publicly unless you've been back in the church for 5 years.
mm,
What? 5 years is nothing. 5 years of doing anything of that substance is nothing, personally speaking. And yet that was the qualification to become a public doctor. It was just to be practicing a religion for 5 years.
mm,
The next one I heard was Yes. Um, Within the, just these I hate to use a leftist term, but these reactionary statements, where you've had the pro-life movement, to its credit, address one of the abortionist critiques, right? The abortionists say, well, look, you pro-life people only care about life in the womb. You don't care about the bum on the street. You don't care about the drug addict. And so the pro-life movement has, laudably over the decades, built out the pro-life thing to being a philosophy of sorts that echoes out into the death penalty, and it's bigger than just the baby stuff.
Yeah.
But one of these know-it-alls, you're like, no, the pro-life movement is just abortion. Come on, get to the chase there. It's just this. I forget the context of that, but it just completely chucking the nuances that the pro-life movement made, just to have this hard stance, which only emboldens the abortionists. I mean, you end up back to the original part, the original problem, which caused the pro-life movement to develop a more intricate philosophy.
Yeah.
And then the final point, and I've jabbered on for a bit, but this is quite a centerpiece lately. You have Fiducia Supplicans, and the objection to that, as I've been able to interpret from people, the main objection is that, look, how could you bless good things in a regular situation? Is that fair to say that that's the main objection to Fiducia Supplicans, that there's something inherently wrong in the homosexual relationship and it can't be magnified? Is that?
Yeah, and unfortunately,
Okay.
I mean, that's the one that we see here from a lot of bishops. Is kind of sophistic, but yeah.
Yes, and there's it's not the decision I would have made in the phraseology, like a lot of these things. But here's just the one point, though, of these people that are not taking intellectual rigor to things. They're just reacting.
Yeah.
Within the document Fiducia Supplicans, in paragraph 34, it brings up the topic of elderly blessings.
Yeah.
And I haven't yet heard any, because that the fact that you had blessings of elderly people, and the document itself says we're not blessing everything in every old person's life.
Yeah.
Right. It just shows that that has even been addressed.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making a mess of things here. I'm just trying to lay out the laziness of what I find is a lot of this speaking world.
That is so funny, because that's just the word I was going to respond with, like lazy. I think that's what you're saying. There's laziness, sophistry, and
like there was this cardinal who wrote Fiducia Supplicans. Here's a fourth example. He had some book, and I guess it used some erotic imagery to speak of the spiritual life.
Right.
And some of these internet doctors, they actually, with a straight face, they don't realize how sloppy this is. They were just dropping these texts into Google Translate, just like sections of the text. The spicy stuff that would get clicks and things. And they even admitted they hadn't read this book, and they didn't even know the language it was really written in. And we're getting it filtered through an online thing. I mean, it's just sloppy.
Yeah. And they don't care what harm they cause to people. When I was on LifeSite News, when that whole thing dropped with Cardinal Fernandez, who's the prefect for the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith, when his book came out or was released, first this old book that he had written was released to a lot of social media commentators, a few days before, and there was a message attached with the email saying, "Hey, don't publicize this until like 8:30 the next morning," or something like. So this is an agenda. It was sent to all these social media people in the Catholic space as a leak, right? And so some of them, like you said, took excerpts of this book, translated it, put it on their website, like LifeSite News. I go read this, John, and in the material that was published from the book was so pornographic, so disturbing, that it troubled me. Just having thoughts, having images from looking at these words. So, and that happened to me. I can't imagine what someone who's a guy who's really, or a woman who's really struggling with pornography and masturbation, what impact it would have had on them.
Mm,
So there's a lack of care, there's a lack of concern for souls with a lot of these organizations, a lot of these individuals,
mm,
clearly, that they're sometimes in it for the clicks. They're not in it for the truth. Okay.
mhm,
I think there is a legitimate critique of Fiducia Supplicans. I think there's a legitimate critique of Cardinal Fernandez's book. I think there's some very troubling words in a document that they produced. Words such as irregular or couples, words that in Catholic theology we have, and we don't even know what that is. What's a couple? We know what we know holy matrimony is. We know what spouses are.
mm.
What's irregular? I've never heard of that in Catholic theology. There's some words that need further development. So there's legitimate critiques there.
Sure.
Um, but at the same time, why the easy take?
Mhm,
Again, I think it probably goes back to profit. It probably goes back to some maybe again, I'm not going to cast aspersions, but um, the more you talk, the less you pray, the less you listen. So if you have taken on this position of being a talker and just wanting to put out content, then that's going to have some effect on your soul, right?
mhm,
And so maybe there's some things going on there that we don't want to pause and wait. We just want to put out content, right?
mhm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the translation there. When you say, so and so trans on their website, it's not that they're sitting there with a dictionary. I just wanted to highlight that they're copy and pasting it into a web. They don't even know the languages that these things are written in, and
Yeah.
to say nothing of, and this happens in history land quite a bit in terms of research and writing. To say nothing of, where is this book from? How do you know that this isn't just coming out of whole cloth? And that whole aspect of what's the provenance of those quotes and things? That's that exists in traditional Catholic land. I mean, nobody can seem to place the the story of Leo the 13th. Hearing that I don't know if you've heard this story. I heard it growing up all the time of Leo the 13th, God and the devil have a conversation after mass. You ever hear that? And then God said to the devil, "You can have the next 100 years." You ever hear that
Oh
story?
yeah, you've heard it.
Yeah, nobody can seem to find where this story is before the Second World War. So you have this 60-year period. Nobody can trace where this story came out of, except the earliest is a GI magazine, a fiction. And so you
Wow.
have this story of religious fiction from the 1940s, and here we are 80 years later, and it's been accepted as this historical fact.
Wow.
And you're going to see the same thing happen with some of these books if people don't follow the quotes and all.
Yeah. I had no idea about that. The one that always troubled me is, as a person who's, I love Dominican spirituality, right? But whenever someone tells me that our Blessed Mother Mary appeared to Saint Dominic and gave him a rosary, I'm like, where did that story come from, right?
Yes, exactly. Yep.
um. So yeah, but I never heard that. I didn't even know the source of that was a fiction book. That's pretty amazing.
And what people aren't getting is the people who are inclined to this and this kind of anti-intellectualism is that these things undermine the actual faith of people. It doesn't actually undermine the Catholic faith, I'm saying, but I mean, people who notice this stuff, it tends to, if it hits them all at once. Well, if this story of Saint Michael and the devil and whatever is inaccurate, and this story of Saint Dominic and Our Lady no one can seem to trace that, and simple people, this undermines the whole faith for them, and the sloppiness online. These people probably think they're being badass by saying, yeah, the pro-life movement is only about saving babies. Forget about all this jazz about building a pro-life for life. What you're not understanding is how that strikes, people who aren't in your little bubble.
Yeah, yeah,
And
definitely
maybe
harmful.
go on, sir. Yeah.
What do you think about though? So we spent some time speaking about the pendulum swinging to the so-called right, the traditionalists.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think about the other way that the pendulum swings? Those who, rather than offering I think, a legitimate critique of something troubling, or they're instant, they lean into immediately defend the Pope at all costs, or defend the Magisterium at all costs, as if, there's three grades of magisterial documents. The first two are untouchable. The church says that there's no error in them. Infallible and solemn documents, dogmatic teachings, and definitions concerning dogmatic teachings. Here, the church says there is no error in these two teachings. But the lower two grades concerning morals and faith and disciplines, the church says it could be error. Of course, it's going to be absolutely rare, but there could be. We just have to see how this thing plays out over time. But I think there are some people in the space, John, who would just immediately jump in concerning those lower two, faith and morals and disciplines, and just immediately say, we can't object to this. We have to accept this without question, because it comes from the magisterium. What I would probably tend to say is, yes, even Pope Benedict XVI, when he's Ratzinger, said, yes, even disciplines we have to accept and be obedient to. But he would say that there could be error, and we have to discern, over a course of time. And over a course of time doesn't happen in a couple months, right? Our church is 2,000 years old. We discern things over time, right? For example, when it comes to Fiducia, Supplicans, we see with a lot of bishops all around the world, some of them being kind of shallow, some of them are not being shallow, but we're seeing this was maybe becoming some sort of consensus, is that there's some things in this document that maybe shouldn't have been put in this document, right? And so this is how the church discerns over time. So we still have to let that play out. But what do you think about those who lean in immediately and say, no, we have to accept this, shut up and be quiet?
Yeah, I suppose it would depend on where that person's coming from. Is it coming from, someone grouchy bum like myself who's noticed the sloppiness of the traditionalists and is, giving the benefit of the doubt in the sense of, let's actually see what it says and try to take it as a good faith document and so forth, with Fiducia, Supplicans, or 1,000 other things. Or, and this is this idea of discernment, and I can sympathize with the so-called traditionalists in this. Is that sort of attitude, what you lay out, coming from someone who's drinking too deeply from the world? And I'm certainly with you on having both eyebrows raised when you see the Pope running around with Rockefeller people being the advisors, the Visa MasterCard lady, or all this climate jazz, and which is just a stock market scheme as far as I can tell, or this Fiducia stuff and so forth. Is the defense of these sorts of things coming from someone who is just drunk on pop culture and just, or when I say a normie, I mean, that would be a whole other thing. And that gets to the whole point of I think, whatever of this spectrum or whatever these Catholic denominations, something all of us need to be is becoming a creature of our time. And that is, it would seem, one and all is what's happening in terms of just immediately reacting. Everyone has a right to speak on a topic immediately, and not filtering, as you say, filtering these things through the magisterium, through just recollection. Nobody cares now 3 weeks later or a month later about Fiducia Supplicans. Right now we're on to the next thing and the next thing. Right? Nobody's even meditating on this stuff of a couple months later, let it go alone years. So there's that aspect of, I think, all of us, this Joe Blow normie whose bishop is the television and the iPhone, and that's his worldview, or it's those of us who flatter ourselves and think we know the Catholic faith, and we're way above it, and we're never going to be taken along by the agendas. But we're all being taken along by just the quick clicks and all of it. And we need that discernment to filter things through the magisterium, through quiet time, through church councils, through more quiet time. That's what I would bring to your question if I answered it at all.
Yeah. I think there are those in social media and other media outfits who do active as if they are CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or whatever, the corporation is that profits off of the vision. That their agenda is to give us anxiety, to make us worry, to fill us with fear, to make us hate the next person, make us hate our neighbor. Why? Because there's a lot of money in that whole scheme. Fear, worry, anger. You can make a lot of money off of that. And what they have to do is to keep this cycle going and making us angry and fearful and stressed out about things, is they have to, as you say, hop from one crisis to the next. A day doesn't go by where they're telling us, you got to worry about this. No, that's over. You got to worry about this one now. And so, yeah, I think that's true. I think even in Catholic social media, I think that's the agenda. That let me give you something else to worry about. We don't have to worry about this anymore. Here's the next thing that Pope Francis did, or this is the next thing that Jesuit Jamie Martin said. Is you got to work. And I just don't think, again, there's no care, there's no concern for Catholic souls. I think if there were, that we would be doing what we're doing. And I know there's not a whole lot of money to be made. I know personally, right? From, the content we put out at St. Dallas Media, I know there's not a lot of clicks to be made from teaching people how to contemplative prayer, right? Or getting into the minutia of the ontological argument or impassibility. These really fine-tuned theological arguments. I know there's not a lot of clicks in that. I know there's not a lot of money in that. I know where the money is at. I know where the clicks are at. I get it. But going back to what I said earlier, what's the limits? Can we and I don't want the bishops to come in and police us. I would just like us to be mature Catholics and say, have some sort of gentleman's agreement that enough is enough, that these things that we're putting out are not getting anyone to heaven. None of it is helping anyone lead a deeper interior spiritual life. It's just not. What it's doing is causing fear, anxiety, worry, hatred of neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, look at our time together. When we did our first episode about you coming out of the Freemasons, right? I put Freemason in the title. Oh boy, did I get plenty of clicks. They love that juicy stuff and all the rituals and whatever. And you're a Freemason whistleblower, right? Well, how about a year later when we talked about the liturgy going into Advent? Does anyone care? Does anyone care? We at the college here, we offer the divine office. Let off with 4 times a day. Do you think anyone comes to that? I mean, people come, but it's pretty rare. But oh boy, when we're going to have a talk on the Talmud, oh boy, people love that stuff. And it's the same stuff. I mean, the stuff that's going to help you and help me, that nobody cares about that. It's all the jazz about checkerboards, Freemason checkerboards and bricks and stuff. That's what it's just fluff. And one thing to your point too, we've talked about the profit motive, and we've talked about just natural human laziness and sloppiness about just dropping things in Google Translate. Okay, there's all of that. But you mentioned the media, CNN and Fox and so forth. Yeah. In America, it is an open secret that these big media organizations are more or less, depending, are in the pocket of U.S. intelligence. On Fox News, one of probably the main host on Fox News in the evenings wears a CIA pin on his breast lapel. And
Wow.
actually, that's not a secret. That's Sean Hannity. For years, he's worn a little American flag with a CIA pin in the middle. He's not
I
even
did not
hiding
know
it.
that.
Anderson Cooper has a very interesting background too, and the Washington Post and all this.
Mhm.
I'm just going to throw this out there for in Catholic land. The masters of America and the so-called masters of this world, their doctorate degree is in divide and conquer, and you better believe that they have agents within the Catholic world as well in terms of the media people. This happens as Mr. Conspiracy myself. I'm well aware of that media world, and it's
Wow.
you can time your watch to an idea will be growing, and then they'll send with a crazy idea just to get everyone fighting.
Wow.
And could divide and conquer, and I'm just suggesting it that a certain percentage of these Catholic commenters in the traditional world may just be lifetime actors.
Wow. Wow. I never, and how naive of me to not even think that that would translate to other groups. Of course it would. I think that is a fair thing to have us ponder about and not just immediately dismiss. Because why would not that be the case? Of course, we know that the FBI tried to infiltrate I think some SSPX churches or something like that.
Mm.
And so we clearly know who the FBI is, as well as these other groups. Why would not that be the case? Because I think there's something to be said, especially in the United States, where this idea of freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want to say without any consequences, largely something that you can't do in a lot of places in the world. Even here in Germany, I dare you to go on Google or TripAdvisor or any of these review sites and say anything foul about a German company. They will sue you. That's why you don't see that over here. You don't see a lot of
Mm.
reviews unless they're good reviews because you will get sued. But in the United States, there's no consequences. You can say whatever you want to say, and I think that fosters, that allows an easier market to create the fear, the hatred, the division, and the anxiety. Yeah,
Mm.
that's something.
The final point, David, and you've been very generous with your time here, especially approaching the dinner hour as it is in your neck of the woods. That's doubly generous of you. One thing I'd like you to comment on is the Catholic consciousness in Europe versus America in terms of secularism, and what I mean by that is people, as I intimate, as I'm saying, and I'm I'm palpitating this in America. We don't realize how anti-Christ this system is. I mean, that's where kind of the traditional people do have their heads screwed on. They understand how dark this anti-Christ world is rising. I mean, I can go to Danbury and get my abortion. I can go get my kid turned into a girl down in Hartford. My boy turned into so-called, in these gender clinics. I could get uh, all sorts of mischief down in New York City.
Yeah.
Whatever. And I could go to any bank I want and I could go into banking and just make people debt slaves and go on and on and on, get all the porn I want on the computer. A lot of us in America, I don't think we realize how dark it is, and that's why we're all just putzing around. We all have our own little bubble, our own little Catholic bubbles, and everyone is doing their own little Lone Ranger American Protestant thing, going off in their own world. In Europe, here's my question: in Europe, is there? You said they don't have this sort of denominationalism rising. Is that because the Christians in Europe have a crisper understanding of what the faith is and the church, and that they have a crisper understanding of needing to circle the wagon about in the face of secularism? Or am I intuiting things incorrectly?
Yeah, I wonder about that sometimes, right? Because you do hear, especially in Germany, from the United States, you hear a lot of critique of Germany, right? And how the church is dying over here. Um, But living here, it doesn't look a lot different than when I travel back to United States. I think in the larger cities, the attendance looks about the same as a lot of places. In a smaller towns like I'm in, you don't. The Catholic Church here in this town I'm in is called Bond. When I moved here, John, they said, "Oh yeah, the Catholic Church in your town is a Black Catholic Church," which threw me because I knew there's only 2 Black people in this town, right? They said it was a Black Catholic Church, but I didn't know back then that politics has colors, right? Somebody like Angela Merkel, she's yellow, right? But Black is like very, very conservative. So here in this town, St. Valentine's, I can see out my window, St. Valentine Church is. They have a lot of cars there on Sundays, on the Feast of Corpus Christi. At least 25% of this small town was out there. So I think in the local towns, the faith is alive and well. Okay, so I think that's one myth that is dying everywhere. I was just thinking the cities, once you get to the Frankfurt, Munich, places like this, I think there's, even over in Kaiserslautern, I saw a little gay sign outside the church there, so the biggest cities, they're probably like a little more gay. But, so I think there's some myths there. When it comes to, it's much more difficult to get an abortion in Germany than it is in Chicago or Illinois or New York. It's very difficult. Pornography, someone goes on Pornhub, I think in the United States, there's like no filters. Here, you would go there and there's the thing where it says, there's an age limit or something. They have the age limit thing. It's some sort of filter, right? So on the pornography sites, like the major ones, you don't see, there's, you see the so-called gay flag outside of some of these clubs, wherever you're at, whether in Spain or whether it's here in Germany, you know where the clubs are at. You know where the brothels are at, because prostitution is legal. You know where they're at. But what you don't see is, guys just walking down the street looking like they just hopped off a Village People album cover, right? You don't see the flamboyantness. So why is that? Why do we know that these are liberal countries over here, that they have bought into some agendas? But why is it that they even seem to be more conservative in some ways than the United States? I wonder if that is because that their conscience is pricked by their environment, that they're still surrounded by these amazing cathedrals and churches that reach up into the sky, that they have more. We have holidays, they have holy days, and there's a lot of them. Like every Catholic holy day of obligation that we would call, these people don't work. They have so many saint days and holy days obligations where they don't have to go to work. I'm amazed. I have to go to work still, but the Germans I work with, they don't show up. They're not going to go to church that day. They're not going to go to the Feast of the Assumption or anything like that. They're probably not. Most of them are not going to go to church. And I know, because sometimes I'll ask them, "Hey, why are you off tomorrow?" I know. They say, "Oh, it's some church holy day, right?" So for a lot of them, there's not that awareness, but they're surrounded by this rich Catholic culture, and so maybe that's it still keeps that the sense of the sacred somewhere intact, so that what's out and open in the United States is more still in the closet here for now. So maybe that's kind of what I've been working on and thinking about. Like, why is it not as out and open over here as it is in the United States?
Yeah, that really jiving with where my mind is in terms of my work with the school here, is that until we really address culture, there will be no genuine reformation of religion or morals or politics or economics. And the culture is the key. It's the soil from which these things come. And it sounds like Germany has that soil richer than we have here, and you have fruits, as you mentioned, to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I hope it stays that way. I mean, the German government, they've yet to get rid of any Catholic holy days, off days, or I guess Lutherans will recognize even some of those days, and
Sure.
um, so they haven't just tore down the churches or anything like that. As old as they are, they would rather rehab them or keep them together.
Mm,
They will still uh, pay the church's bills. I don't really agree with that. I think that's part of the problem over here. That
wow.
you know, the government's people, the churches are kept up by the tax system here,
Mhm.
but they've yet to take that away from the churches. We said no. They didn't say no. We're not going to give you this money. So there's still a sense that there's something important about Western civilization and where it comes from. The
Mm,
Charlemagne, the Pepper the Shore, the Carolingian Renaissance, and uh, without Germany and things like the Carolingian Renaissance and the impact they had on liturgy and culture, exporting the Roman Rite to places, as far as Ireland and Spain and elsewhere. Without Germany, I don't think impact they made on Catholicism. I don't think Catholicism is what it is today. And so yeah, and maybe the Germans still they appreciate their history. Maybe they're a little bit detached from it. The
mm,
importation of all these Muslims from other countries, Africa and the Middle East and places like that, um, does have, is perhaps making them even more aware of their culture and where they come from. So we'll see how this
mhm.
whole thing plays out.
Yes. There's one final observation that strikes me, and this is my final point here, is we talk about priorities and how much of a creature of the media we all have become, no matter how we flatter ourselves with our adjectives. I'm traditional. I'm resistance. I'm recognize and resist. I'm Orthodox Catholic.
Yeah.
I'm this or that. And just off the cuff, David, it strikes me that while so many people have been distracted, frankly, by Fiducia Supplicans, which is a document which affects a 1/10 of 1%. I mean, the scenario of like two dudes, they've repented, they've come to God, but they have like a lease, and they have to, it's like like what percentage of people are we actually talking about that this document affects? That's gotten everybody's attention, and it's just struck me as you've been talking, um, at the exact same time we're watching in Gaza the New Testament Acts of the Apostles Church with the Palestinian Christians being destroyed before our eyes, being blown to smithereens, and this is not getting any attention. Not all those Palestinians are Muslims, though. A lot of those Christians are being blown sky high, and nobody cares because they're all looking at Fiducia Supplicans. And that just struck me as we were going on here.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that was one of the critiques of a lot of the African bishops about Fiducia Supplicans was that, hey, we're dealing with polygamy over here. We have a big issue about men having like 8 wives.
Mm,
Um, this whole thing with homosexuality, I know the West is trying to import it over here. We get that. It's not making an impact here because we have laws against that type of stuff. But we're dealing with polygamy. So yeah, I think that again, the whole why was that document even necessary in the first place, and why all the tension on it is what I think a lot of African bishops are saying. Like, there's so many issues going on in the world, right? I
yeah,
think we get
that's
overly consumed with some of the things that are going on in our society that we want to be concerned about, stressed about, angry about because we're told to.
yeah, that's kind of where I was going with an earlier point I was making with this Gaza stuff. It's we say first world problems. First world problems. So, Fiducia Supplicans, I can watch 8 hours of podcasts on that. I can bitch and moan about the altar girls or about Eucharistic ministers, right? Where you have polygamy in Africa. You have real witchcraft out once you get out of the cities in Africa. You got Gaza being blown to smithereens.
Yeah,
You got real problems with drugs in America. I mean, those are real spiritual problems.
not to mention
And yeah,
Nigeria, right? Priests and Catholics
yeah,
getting like slaughtered by the dozen. I mean, come on. So
Yeah, that's the perspective I hope that people take away from our chit chat here is what's really a problem. What's really a problem. That's what my talk with you, David, has really enriched my understanding of that.
yeah, it was a great conversation as always. Thanks, John.
Yes, sir. So where can we find out about all your good stuff, including your catechism classes, your books, and this sort of thing? Tell us about your website and whatever you've coming up there, David.
Yeah, please visit Saint Dominic's Media. Put it in your favorites or your bookmarks, and there's content being updated at least once a week. A reflection on the readings at Mass is something that I put out every Thursday or Friday. It's a different type of reflection on the readings at Mass because I'm integrating how did these readings, how did he touch upon the liturgy? Because the liturgy is pedagogical, it's trying to divinize this. How did these readings play into that? So that's stdominicsmedia.com. Put a S on Dominic's because there's a St. Dominic Media. So St. Dominic's Media, and you'll see everything that we're doing. I hope you come and visit.
Great. Well, David, hang on here for a second as we knock off. And to the audience, thank you for your attention. And after you head over to David's site, I hope that I've guilted you enough to join us from time to time for the Divine Office. You can find those websites down below in the description. And David, especially thank you for your insights today.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's a great conversation.